Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. At least 10 people are killed after a vehicle hits a crowd of people in New Orleans. The suspect is confirmed dead after a firefight with police. The FBI are now investigating a case of terrorism. US President-elect Donald Trump repeats a warning at his New Year's Eve bash. Hamas better let the hostages come back soon. And the era of cheap Russian gas to the European Union ends as transit across Ukraine is stopped, reviving fears of the 2021 energy crisis. The suspect in the New Orleans attack has died after exchanging gunfire with police. 12 people were killed and at least 35 injured after a man drove a pickup truck into a large crowd celebrating the new year. The incident occurred in the French Quarter of the city, which is popular with tourists. The FBI are investigating the incident as an act of terrorism and say they found an explosive device at the scene. New Orleans police say the driver was hell-bent on creating carnage and damage.
And it was very intentional behavior. This man was trying to run over as many people as he possibly could. It was not a DUI situation. This is a more complex and more serious based on the information we have right now. With respect to numbers, we have right now, and as you already know, this could change throughout the day.
For more on this, our correspondent Caroline Malone joins me right now from Washington, D.C. Caroline, the FBI are investigating the act as terrorism. Have the authorities provided any more details regarding the identity of the attacker or of the motives?
Well, any moment now, there's due to be another police press conference in which they would likely give more information about what they've found so far. What we do know is that the license plate of this vehicle was a Texas license plate from the state of Texas, and reports are suggesting that this car was spotted in Texas just a few days ago. It's unclear, though, if the suspect was the one driving the car. It's actually the car registered to a 41-year-old man from Houston, Texas, but it's not clear if this is the one and the same as the person that ended up driving this pickup truck into crowds of people, killing at least 10 in the early hours of New Year's Day. But certainly we can expect police officials to update us on specifics about what they do know about the suspect so far and any possible motivation. They are investigating it as a, quote, act of terror, but certainly we don't yet know why someone would do such a horrific thing, ramming a pickup truck into crowds of people who are there just to have a good time. There have also been a number of questions raised about the police presence. So the police officials saying there are about 300 officers in and around the French Quarter because of the number of people out celebrating, but that there weren't sufficient barricades put up to stop vehicles from getting through. The police chief saying earlier in the day that this vehicle actually managed to get around barricades, but witnesses actually saying something contradictory to that, which is that there weren't sufficient barricades up. Now, there is a process of trying to essentially pedestrianize these streets for these types of events. Tragically, it's not the first time that someone has driven a vehicle into people and even hurt and killed people. You know, we've seen both in the United States and in other countries, for instance, in Germany not long ago, with people trying to hurt others using a vehicle. So clearly security officials would be aware that this type of thing is possible. Also questions being raised about what will happen later today at a major college football game, an American football game that's due to take place in New Orleans. And it's a big game that attracts many people, not just from that state, but from across the country. It's a New Year's Day tradition. And usually you have crowds up to about 70,000 people that come into the stadium. Those that run the events are saying that they are in constant contact with security officials, with police, with law enforcement, and will continue to update people about what will happen with regard to this event. But certainly what we what was indicated by the police earlier is that they don't want people to go anywhere near the French Quarter because it's still a crime scene, but that they are encouraging people to go about their normal lives, as it were, in other places, including for this college football game.
Caroline, public figures have been speaking out about it, including Donald Trump. What has he said, and what more can we take from the rhetoric around that?
Yes, absolutely. So Donald Trump, the president-elect, put out a statement on his platform, Truth Social, just a short time ago. And this was after there were reports coming out that this Texas license plate car, the pickup truck, was spotted in Texas and potentially at Eagle Pass, which is a border crossing between Mexico and Texas. I must say that hasn't been at least verified publicly yet. But Donald Trump coming out and saying, when I said that criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals that we have in our country, that statement was refuted. But it turned out to be true. The crime rate in our country at a level that nobody's seen before. So it appears that he is suggesting there that he thinks at least the suspect has come from a different country. I should reiterate, we don't know that yet. That hasn't been confirmed. And certainly President Biden, when he spoke a short time ago, wasn't ready to give out that type of information, even if it is deemed to be true. And certainly, as I've said, this pickup truck had license plates from Texas and is owned by a man who is from Houston, Texas. So really some questions have been raised here, both by Trump and by law enforcement, about this suspect. And we'll have to wait and see when more of this investigation is laid out about what actually happened here, who the suspect is, whether he is an American, whether he's from somewhere else, and what his motivation was. Certainly President Biden being very clear when he spoke a short time ago that the country will not tolerate this type of violence, and then there's never any justification for this type of tragic event.
We have a lot of unanswered questions, as you say, Caroline, but authorities are reportedly still searching for explosive devices. You mentioned the football game. What is the security situation in the city like right now?
So around the area of the attack, of the crime scene, about 8 blocks have been cordoned off. The police have stopped people from coming and going in those areas, particularly straight after the attack itself. Hotels were evacuated, the area was cleared. And the police were spotted using robots, for instance, to look under vehicles to check if there were any IEDs, any explosive devices, because at least one is believed to have been found. So, you know, it was a multi-level investigation that's going on with the police here. They're concerned not just about this truck, about this suspect, about the fact that he clearly had weapons on him because there was a shootout between him and the police. At least 2 police officers were injured in that shootout. They're believed to be in a stable condition in hospital. There are, you know, a number of people also still recovering in hospital from these injuries, potentially some of them very serious, 35 or so people in different hospitals across the city. But as well as this cordoned off area, there's going to be a very strong police presence on the streets, and particularly around the football game. And I think that's where, you know, questions are still unanswered. We have about 8 hours to go until this football game is supposed to kick off. People would normally be gathering in the afternoon and going to the stadium that can hold up to 60 or 70,000 people. So a huge amount of people that are due to be out on the streets, again, celebrating New Year's Day and also going to a sports event. And obviously, a lot of them will be wondering if they are safe, given what's happened just after New Year's Eve, midnight, in their city. So real concern for people's safety here. But so far, the police have been saying that as long as people don't go anywhere near the crime scene, they should carry out their normal business. But I can expect that we will get some more updates about specifics for people who are out and about on the streets of New Orleans later today.
Caroline Malone, our reporter in Washington, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on that developing story in New Orleans. Now, as the world rings in the new year, concerns are mounting in Europe over a new energy crisis. Russian gas has stopped flowing to the European Union via Ukraine after a 5-year deal expired, marking the end of a decade-long agreement. Both Moscow and Kyiv were unable to reach an understanding to keep that pipeline active as the war extends into 2025. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has previously Zelensky said that his country will not allow Russia to earn additional billions on our blood. In a statement today, the country's energy ministry says that the transit was stopped in the interest of national security, adding that Russia is losing markets and will suffer financial losses. Meanwhile, in Europe, price hikes for gas are expected, with notable fluctuations in Austria, Hungary and Slovakia. Europe has tried to wean off Russian energy resources, but its alternatives are far more expensive. The stoppage will also impact Ukraine, which is estimated to lose $800 million a year in transit fees from Russia, while Gazprom will face nearly $5 billion of losses in gas sales. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico lashes out over the impact the stoppage will have on his country in his New Year's speech.
Nobody, I repeat, nobody is pushing Slovakia away from the living space that is the European community. But we must see that the selfish national interests of the big ones and the meaningless geopolitical goals are beginning to dominate this community. And on the other hand, ignoring the needs of the smaller ones. In world politics, it absolutely applies that it does not matter whether elephants love or fight. The grass always suffers. I do not want Slovakia to be such grass, as we see these days when the transit of gas through Ukraine is stopped, which will have drastic impact on all of us in the European Union, but not on the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, Poland's foreign minister has praised the move, calling it a victory over Putin and Russia following the enlargement of NATO by both Finland and Sweden. I'm now joined by Professor Arild Moe, who is a senior research fellow at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute and an expert in Russian gas and energy policy. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's a pleasure to have you on. First question, is the era of cheap Russian gas to the European Union over after the 5-year deal expired this morning?
Well, it is almost over, but not completely. Russia is still exporting gas via Turkey into the Balkans. So there are volumes into Greece and Serbia, and also reaching Hungary and Romania that way. Besides, Russia is also still exporting considerable amounts of liquefied natural gas to Europe from its production site in the Arctic.
So, as you said there, Russia can still send gas to Hungary, Turkey and Serbia through the Turk Stream pipeline. Can we expect more gas to flow through this route, and will it help Russia financially?
There are physical limitations on how much gas can be transported on that route, maybe up to 15 billion cubic meters. So the volumes that now are taken out because of the end of transit through Ukraine cannot be replaced by Turk Stream volumes. That's clear. But it is possible to send some more gas through those pipelines if the customers are interested in that.
The European Commission has said the EU was prepared for Russian gas to stop flowing, but Moldova is already suffering shortages. Temperatures across Europe are near freezing in some parts. Can they really survive without Russian gas?
The situation is different in Moldova and in the other receivers of Russian gas, I would say. When it comes to Slovakia, which obviously is a big importer of Russian gas, and Austria, they have possibility to take gas from other sources via the integrated pipeline system in Europe. But that gas will be more expensive. And that is the problem that the Slovak Prime Minister is complaining about. But it will be substantially more expensive. When it comes to Moldova, which is supplied by another pipeline through Ukraine, they don't have immediate replacement capacity. And the gas to Moldova is very important for supplying a big power station. So they are risking a big shortage of electricity.
Russia has lost an important market. It has been transporting gas through Ukraine since 1991. How much will this impact Russia economically? We know Russia is already suffering from soaring inflation.
Well, in fact, the gas transit through Ukraine has been going on much longer, and it has already been cut down seriously since 2022. The recent or the stop or the full stop of the last transit volumes through Ukraine means that Russia is losing well, not insignificant volumes, export volumes and income, maybe 5-6 billion euros a year. So that is very important, especially for the Russian gas company Gazprom, who already has big financial problems because the European market has contracted so drastically.
The EU, as you said earlier, has found alternative sources in LNG from places like Qatar and the US. Is this further isolating Russia, and is it pushing the EU into a really high price category, which is unsustainable moving forward?
I think it's quite clear that, at least in the short term, the loss of the volumes through Ukraine will mean higher prices in Europe generally, because the gas market is quite well integrated. How much? It's very difficult to say. But over a somewhat longer term, there are other suppliers who are filling the gap, and especially LNG producers around the world. So how this will look in a couple of years is a different issue.
So as you say there, the immediate effects do appear to be light, but from a strategic and symbolic point of view, what does this mean for Europe?
Well, it means that the dependence on Russia is decreasing even further. It has decreased very much since 2022 and now further. And it's very unlikely that Russia will come back in a big way as a supplier of gas to Europe, even if things may change with a peace settlement in Ukraine.
And just one last question for you. What does this mean for the gas prices across the world? Will we see an impact on them? Is the price of gas going to go up, or will it not have much effect on the market?
Well, if Europe is importing even more LNG than it already does, it has an impact on prices in other markets as well. Again, it is difficult to say because there are a lot of production capacities around the world that also will react to this new situation. But I think we can be quite certain that there will be some price impact, but very difficult to say how much.
Thank you so much. That's Professor Arild Moe, who is a Senior Research Fellow at Fridtjof Nansen Institute and an expert in Russian gas and energy policy. I do appreciate your insights this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now to some breaking news we have coming in. The authorities in New Orleans have revealed the identity of the attacker as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar, who was with an ISIS flag mounted on the track. Meanwhile, Russia launched an aerial attack on Kyiv in the first hours of 2025, killing 2, according to reports. The attack was a rare strike on the heart of the Ukrainian capital. The attack came hours after President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed in his New Year message that he would do everything possible to bring the war to an end over the next 12 months.
Дорогі українці, дорогі українки.
Dear Ukrainians, may 2025 be our year, the year of Ukraine. We know that peace will not be given to us as a gift, but we will do everything to stop Russia and end the war. This is what each of us wishes for. I have no doubt that the new American president is willing and capable of achieving peace and ending Putin's aggression. He understands that the first is impossible without the second, because this is not a street fight where you have to calm down both sides. This is the full-scale aggression of a mad state against a civilized one. And I believe that we, together with the United States, are capable of exerting that force, of compelling Russia into a just peace.
Russian President Vladimir Putin's New Year address portrayed optimism and reassurance while thanking the country's armed forces.
Our independent, free and strong country was able to respond to the most difficult challenges. And now, on New Year's Eve, we are thinking about the future. We are confident that everything will be fine. We will only move forward.
They better release the hostages. That was Donald Trump's message to Hamas during his New Year's Eve gala at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where the president-elect was asked about a potential ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, talks which have appeared to hit a snag.
About a ceasefire deal, you said if they don't have one by the time you take office, there will be hell to pay.
We're going to see what happens.
Have you spoken to President?
They better let the hostages come back soon.
Trump first made a similar threat in July and repeated it again last month, warning that there will be hell to pay in the Middle East and for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities if the hostages aren't released by the time he takes office. Trump's repeated threat comes as Israeli and US officials say a deal between Israel and Hamas is unlikely before his return to the office. Negotiations have stalled, with Israel insisting on releasing only living hostages in the very first phase, while Hamas demands a permanent ceasefire. Back to a reminder of that breaking news we brought you earlier. The authorities in New Orleans have revealed the identity of the attacker as a 42-year-old Samsuddin Jabbar, who was seen with an ISIS flag mounted on the truck. As the war drags into the new year, Israeli strikes on Gaza have killed at least 20 Palestinians, including women and children. On New Year's Day, one strike hit a home in northern Gaza, while another overnight struck a refugee camp in central Gaza, killing 2 people, according to health personnel at Al-Aqsa Hospital. For more on this, I'm joined by Gershon Baskin, Middle East Director for the International Communities Organization and a former Israeli hostage negotiator. Gershon, can we start with the current status of talks between Israel and Hamas? And what is your understanding of why no solution has been reached despite repeated attempts that we've seen?
Well, the state of the negotiations demonstrates the total lack of trust between the two parties, who each accuse the other of lying and deceiving. They have been talking for months about a phased deal, during which time there would be an initial period of 6 weeks of ceasefire when Hamas will release about 30 Israeli hostages and Israel will release a large number of Palestinian prisoners. It's supposed to go into a second phase of another 6-week period, during which time Israel would withdraw from Gaza. But Hamas is demanding that Israel obligate itself to end the war, and Israel is not ready to do that. There's an argument between Israel and Hamas over the list of names of hostages that would be released in the first wave. Israel is demanding that all the hostages who are defined as civilians, not military, would be released. And in addition to them, anyone who is wounded or sick, the elderly for sure. And Hamas says that they don't have 30 or 32 hostages in that category, and they want to include some of the dead hostages, and Israel is rejecting that. There's no direct communication, and it's very difficult to negotiate these kind of deals when there's no trust. And when the third-party negotiators, Egypt and Qatar, also seem to have their own interest in their own ways of working.
So is President-elect Donald Trump the only person who can put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to reach an agreement, as it appears the Biden government has failed to do this?
Right. Well, it's certainly true that Trump, if he wants to, can apply pressure on Netanyahu, because during the days of Democratic administrations in Washington, Netanyahu always had his Republican friends in Congress to go to and complain about the president or put pressure on the administration. With Trump in the White House and a Republican-held Congress, Netanyahu really has no one else to go to. I've been told by Israeli negotiators that they expect a deal to be done within 3 weeks, and the 3-week target is the January 20th date of the inauguration of President Trump. It is not clear if they intend to do it before Trump enters the White House or after he enters the White House. There are those who say that Israel wants to give this gift to Trump, and there are those who recognize that Trump said that he doesn't want this issue on his desk when he enters the White House. In any event, it's not only Israel that needs to be pressured, Hamas needs to be pressured as well.
If we just go back and talk about the hostages, according to the Times of Israel, just 2 days ago, Hamas refused to release 22 of the 34 living hostages in a partial ceasefire deal. Does Hamas have any access to all of the hostages? And do they actually know how many are still alive?
No, I don't believe that Hamas has all the information of where all the hostages are. There are 100 hostages, according to Israel. Hamas does not control all of them. They don't know where all of them are. Hostages were being held by other organizations, including the Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front. But there were also civilians who were holding hostages, and it's very likely that hostages may be buried underneath rubble of buildings bombed by Israel. We don't know. Hamas doesn't know. Hamas is saying that they need a full week of total ceasefire in order to be able to come out of their bunkers and tunnels and search for the hostages. They're not using any kind of modern communication, digital communication at all, because they don't want to be located by Israel. So it's really an operation that has to be done by Hamas on the ground by going around different parts of the Gaza Strip that they no longer control.
Hamas has been significantly weakened. From the perspective, are the hostages their most important asset, like the only pawn they have left in the game now?
It is their main pawn. It's not their only pawn, because although they've been significantly weakened and they don't have command and control of the entire Gaza Strip, they still have the ability every day to come out of tunnels, bunkers, and booby-trap buildings and kill Israeli soldiers, as they have been doing. During this past week, they've continued to shoot rockets at Israel, even though the Israeli army is spread out across the Gaza Strip. They still have apparently a significant number of operatives, of combatants, and they still have ammunition and weapons that they can use. The hostages is a main point of leverage, but I would say the other main point of leverage they have to their benefit is the whole question of who's going to control Gaza when this war is over. Obviously, Israel doesn't want Hamas there anymore. I don't believe that any of the partners in the region do, not the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Saudis, or anyone else wants Gaza to be controlled by Hamas, because everyone wants to help to rebuild Gaza, but they won't put a single dollar into Gaza if Hamas is continuing to govern Gaza.
How is Benjamin Netanyahu viewed by the families of the hostages in Israel? Is he determined to keep this war going for his own political gain and not reach any agreement?
The hostage is a representative of the overall Israeli population, and according to public opinion polls, between 70 to 80% of Israelis want this war to end and want a deal to be done that would bring all the hostages home at once. Not this phased deal that will take weeks or months to implement and have a million points of exit from it. The public wants this war over. They recognize that Netanyahu wants to keep the war going because that's his political survival. That's what prevents us from going to new elections and from a commission of inquiry to be established that will hold responsible those who failed to protect Israel on October 7th and all the events that led to October 7th. So yeah, Netanyahu has an interest in keeping this war going, and this is why he refuses to end the war.
Thank you so much. That was Gershon Baskin, Middle East Director for the International Communities Organization and a former Israeli hostage negotiator. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Now to a reminder of our breaking news. The authorities in New Orleans have revealed the identity of the attacker as 42-year-old Shamsud Din Jabba. That's according to New Orleans Advocate. It has also been confirmed that the attacker had mounted an ISIS flag on the truck used in the attack. That happened earlier today, that attack in New Orleans. It killed 10 people and injured 35 others. We'll bring you more on that breaking news story as we get it throughout the show, but confirmation on the name of the suspect there. In Serbia, instead of partying, thousands turned to New Year's celebrations in anti-government protest in the capital Belgrade. As midnight struck, they stood in silence for 15 minutes to commemorate the 15 people killed by a collapsing awning at a train station in November, blaming rampant government corruption and poor construction. The government does deny these allegations. And in the British capital, London, the new year was welcomed with a fireworks display across the River Thames. As Big Ben struck midnight, visitors came from all over the world to watch the fabulous show.
I came here with my friends, and she is from India. She just traveled to visit the fireworks here, and she's going back on 4th of January.
We are coming from Turkey, and actually we are living in Dublin. When we are watching on TV last year, we decided to come here for next year, and we are here finally.
Meanwhile, the Middle East welcomed 2025 last night right here in Dubai, which is renowned for its spectacular Burj Khalifa fireworks display. The world's tallest building was illuminated with stunning fireworks and a laser show. And now over to Africa. Nairobi's various skyscrapers were a flurry of colour and fireworks exploded over the Kenyan capital, welcoming the new year. Revellers and worshippers ushered in 2025 in both song and dance, many expressing mixed reactions to the year that was 2024.
My resolution for next year is basically to be closer to God and to try and make the best out of my life.
...2024 was not good for me. I'm battling breast cancer. One thing I should ask God for, this 2025, restore back my health.
I'm so happy. 2024 has been a blessing from God. The economy has been tough, but we're expecting better in 2025.
Now let's take a look at some other stories making news from around the world. The woman who was burnt to death on a New York subway earlier this month has now been identified. Medical officials say Debreen Karwam was a 57-year-old homeless woman from New Jersey. She was identified through a fingerprint analysis and her death has been ruled as a homicide. Sebastian Zapet has been charged with her murder and arson after allegedly lighting her on fire and watching her burn to death at a subway station. It's a new year and many people are committed to turning over a new leaf. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, has gone one step further and he's actually changed his name. According to the tech mogul's social media platform X, he's now called Kikus Maximus. Musk has also sparked debate by changing his profile picture, which shows Pep the Frog, a meme that has been used by far-right groups. He has offered no immediate explanation for his new name and also his new profile picture. Now, in the US, a wave of new laws have come into effect across the country today, including changes to gun safety, medical marijuana, and also social media. In states such as New Hampshire, the law will allow employees to store guns and ammunition in locked vehicles on their employer's property. Meanwhile, medical marijuana is now legal in Kentucky, but smoking the plant does remain illegal. And lastly, children under 14 years old will not be allowed to create social media accounts, while teens aged 14 and 15 will require parental consent to access those platforms. South Korea is sending the flight data recorder of the plane that fatally crashed this past Sunday to the United States for further analysis. The South Korea Transport Ministry said local investigators have extracted the data from the plane's cockpit voice recorder and will convert it into an audio file. Taking it to the US, South Korea hopes the black box will reveal the last few minutes that led up to the crash, which killed 175 passengers and crew members. It is expected to take about 2 days for investigators to convert the data to audio files. Israel has launched a new airline called Tech Air. This comes amid a series of shortage of flights to and from Israel due to international airlines cancelling flights to and from Israel due to security concerns. The airline will run flights to and from the US on Airbus A330-900 planes until at least the very end of March. A reminder of today's top stories. 10 people are killed after a vehicle hits a crowd of people in New Orleans. The suspect is 42-year-old Shamsullin Jabbar, who was confirmed dead after a firefight with police. US President-elect Donald Trump repeats a warning at his New Year's Eve bash: Hamas better let the hostages come back soon. And the era of cheap Russian gas to the European Union ends as transit across Ukraine is stopped, reviving fears of the 2021 energy crisis. And that's all from us on W News this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Riz Khan is coming up next. Good night and happy 2025.